I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to cover news and information that the old legacy media really does not want you to know about. We try to recover some lost history and explain the inexplicable. Today we're in luck because in order to recover some lost history and explain the inexplicable, we have Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell, the president of Counterpoint Institute for Policy, Research, and Education. Dr. Shea, welcome to On Watch.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always an honor to be here.
Great to have you back with us. Today we're going to talk about something that a lot of Americans are not necessarily tuned into,
right,
but it's super important. It's so important that we have a couple of clips from Vice President Vance to kind of tee it up and give us some foundation. Today's topic, America's relationship with Europe under Trump. So first and foremost, let's hear from Vice President Vance on what he thinks the relationship is right now. Let's play the first video.
Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election.
Vice President Vance knows firsthand what that is all about when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, cancel culture, and the idea of people voting their conscience and that not being very popular. We know all about that. We also have some great examples in Europe to discuss in just a couple of moments. But I want to just lay one more foundation stone for our discussion with another clip from Vice President Vance at Munich.
What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years.
Dr. Shea, that is incredibly strong
it is,
and powerful language from the Vice President. And just for context, he was in Munich at a security conference with NATO and EU leaders. This is back in February, a couple of months back, and he really laid it on the line. What are your impressions about what we just watched?
President Vance slammed the globalists, Chris. I was so proud of him as an American because a lot of Americans and citizens across the rest of the world don't understand what's going on in the European Union, and it's similar to what happened under the Biden administration here. And that is there is a very communistic-like top-down decision-making body of the European Union that is suppressing the rights of their people, suppressing the voices of their people. And it was my research in Hungary for my book that really drove that home to me, because as I was interviewing Hungarians, they said to me, hey, you know, the rhetoric coming out of the Biden administration in the US reminds us of our Soviet era. They were under Soviet rule for 46 years. And I am so proud of our president for telling the leaders of the countries in Europe that America can't do business with countries like that, because we don't have a shared vision anymore. We don't share a vision for democracy if they're taking the rights away from their people. And we have had a taste of that under the Biden administration. The Biden administration tried to take over media in a lot of ways. We know the whole litigation against them for sending their departments to Facebook and what was Twitter at that time to suppress people's opinions. Vaccine mandates, we could go on and on. So we've had a taste of this. And I love it that the Trump administration and Vice President Vance are standing up and saying, we're not dealing with that anymore.
So you've just spent the last month basically running around Europe. You were in 5 different European capitals, Budapest, Brussels, Vienna, Warsaw, and Madrid. That's quite a cross-section. And in going to those 5 different European capitals, you were talking about your book, Last Warning to the West, which I recommend to everyone watching and listening to this podcast. But it was kind of a two-way street. So you were talking about your book, but you were getting a lot of feedback too, right?
Sure.
What are Europeans hoping for when they see Vice President Vance, when they hear President Trump? What did you get as feedback? You have a book out, but what were Europeans saying back to you?
Totally the opposite of what the mainstream media is telling Europeans and telling Americans. I had hundreds of people come to me in these book signings and another conference that I did. I was on a panel with members of different governments that came. They are encouraged that America finally has real leadership again. They are encouraged that the Trump administration is slamming down the DEI nonsense, the woke agenda, pushing of programs. The U.S. Agency for International Development that Trump has reduced to about 18% of what it originally was, that was the agency pushing all these LGBT or transgender, et cetera, programs into countries that didn't want them. That's just an example. But the other thing, Chris, that I think people will be surprised about is I was hearing from a lot of people, even government officials, that they understood that the U.S. needed a more level playing field on tariffs. They understand that they need to pay more for their share of NATO. And, I tried to explain it more and more in the context of what we're dealing with right now with extreme debt, for our government. Trying to deport millions of illegal immigrants, all the things that we have had to deal with lately. And they understand it, and they I heard people say that they were MAGA, some Europeans. So it was very encouraging for me.
So my impression is that one group of people were a little, I guess, maybe influenced or kind of browbeaten by European media that wants to portray Trump as an unhinged lunatic, and that there was another group that, like the American public, they saw through that as propaganda. They knew that, he's not erratic, he's not unhinged, he's not. And so there was one group needed reassurance, one group needed you to tell them, it's okay, it's okay. Yeah. And then the other group was like, well, thank goodness, finally, we have a real American leader. Is that a fair characterization?
And a real global leader that will actually go about the business of leading and defending a country and doing regular business with other countries and not trying to force social ideology like the Biden administration did, the Obama administration did, on these countries. There was apprehension about the tariffs, right? But I assured people, get to the negotiation table quickly. These tariffs are more of a diplomatic tool, a leveraging tool. They're not meant to hurt our allies.
I think to the last or the third kind of foundation stone we're going to lay with video clip here, we saw 2 comments from Vice President Vance in Munich. Let's drop in here one more clip. This is President Trump himself speaking in Saudi Arabia, and I think it goes exactly to the point that you just raised.
Okay.
Please play, President.
In recent years, far too many American presidents have been afflicted with the notion that it's our job to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use U.S. policy to dispense justice for their sins. They loved using our very powerful military, and now it's really the most powerful it's ever been. We just are getting a budget approved, $1 trillion, highest budget we've ever had in history for military, $1 trillion. And we're getting the greatest missiles, the greatest weapons. And, you know, I hate to do it, but you have to do it because we believe in peace through strength. You have to have the strength, otherwise bad things could happen. But hopefully we'll never have to use any of those weapons. Seems to be an awfully big waste of money if you're never going to use them, but hopefully we'll never have to use them because the destructive power of some of those weapons are like nobody's seen before. I believe it is God's job to sit in judgment, my job to defend America, and to promote the fundamental interest of stability, prosperity, and peace. That's what I really want to do.
Dr. Shea, what is your interpretation? What is your analysis of what Trump is conveying in that speech?
I think he's right. I think that he believes also in peace through prosperity. And we have an example for in his last administration with the Abraham Accords in the Middle East, which brought countries like Bahrain and UAE together in a normalized relationship with Israel to do trade. And what happened is the trade and the jobs and the income from these agreements of the Abraham Accords just skyrocketed. And it makes sense if you're doing business with someone that you're going to not want to go to war with them, right? It's just a stabilizing element. So I think he's right about that. Actually, Chris, his peace through prosperity plan of his last administration also, which, you know, the Palestinians would not accept, actually would have done that, would have given the Palestinians prosperity also while securing Israel. So I think that it's a very genius way of approaching it. For example, the Abraham Accords were a mutually beneficial economic relationship. So that is more Trump's approach, you know, peace through strength, peace through prosperity. But, you know, he got really slammed in the press by some of the neocons, in my opinion, on the fact that their words was that he wasn't upholding American values. That's not true. What he's saying is America, we've spent the last 80 years not winning any wars.
Correct.
That we've gone to.
We have not won a war since 1945.
Exactly. But we've spent billions of dollars. We've spent hundreds and thousands of lives, of American lives and allies' lives, doing these things. And as the daughter of a Marine Corps officer, that's something that I understand what the cost is of that. So he believes that we have pushed, you know, too far. You can't police 193 countries. There's a certain point where you have to step back from their culture and what's going on in their country and just try to normalize relations and promote stability. You know, like you said, that goes very much to what I was talking about beforehand, where we had our State Department and USAID now for, you know, a couple of decades, pushing plans and programs into other countries around the world. You know, my favorite one I bring up with the Biden administration is that we actually were paying for transgender ballroom dancing programs in Peru under the Biden administration. What does that have to do with diplomacy?
That speech from President Trump is the most radical break of sort of policy, or just sort of the, it didn't matter. It was a uniparty, Republican and Democrat kind of drumbeat since 1945.
Right.
That was a radical, and I think an incredibly important shift and change from, we're going to show up, we're going to have tons of money, we're also going to have a huge army, we're going to tell you how to act. Mm-hmm. We don't care that you may have had centuries or maybe even millennia of your own culture, history, language, religion, whatever it is you've been doing in your part of the world. We don't give a damn. Right. We're going to try to artificially graft Jeffersonian democracy onto your country.
And American culture.
And American culture.
Western culture. And
you may want clean drinking water and a medical clinic, but we're going to give you transgender ballroom dancing.
Right.
And he's saying we're not doing that garbage anymore.
Right, and some of the critics have said he's stepped back from American values
that's a lie, is what that
standing
is.
up for human rights, and that is a lie. And for example, Chris, I mean there's a balance to this. I think on a case by case basis. Like for example, I don't believe China should be in the Human Rights Council at the UN, but we've allowed that. We should stand against those kind of things. And the Uyghur Muslims, Secretary of State Marco Rubio went out and was very much against that the German government recently had put spying on their opposition, the political party that is their biggest opposition in Germany.
Alternative for Deutschland, AfD.
That's it, AfD. Was doing this illegal spying on them, and Marco Rubio went out and said this is wrong. It's and Tom Cotton said you're a police state. You got to stop doing this.
Yeah,
so it's not that we're pulling back from our values, but there's a balance.
We're going to go in a moment and kind of go country by country, because what Vice President Vance, his two clips, what he touched on were some real creepy abuses, this kind of leftover Soviet totalitarian. Mm-hmm. You talked earlier about the EU being a top-down operation dictating to member countries what they could and couldn't do.
Right.
We're going to go country by country in a moment and talk about some real, major league weirdness. This is not just sort of like, oh, we disagree on policy. They're doing stuff that is like anti-Western civilization.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's do that. Vice President Vance talked about some pretty severe problems. We've got a graphic, and we're going to put that up. It's a map of Europe. The countries are in red that we're going to talk about. And I think we're going to start off in the southeast in Romania. Romania had an election canceled because a populist nationalist was in the lead in a runoff, a guy named Georgescu.
Right.
And the EU came in and said, no, you can't have that election result. And they canceled it. And then now, just in the last couple of days.
With pressure from the European Union.
Right. And now they just had a new election just 2 days ago. And guess who won the election?
Another populist.
The centrist who's pro-EU.
Oh, you're talking, yes.
In Romania. So suddenly, guess what happens when you cancel the election and then you hold another election? Guess who wins? The guy that they wanted to win all along, right? Or at least from that school of thought. Somebody who's a friend of the EU, who supports NATO's involvement with Ukraine, all those sorts of issues, they roll right over. Let's go back to the map and take a look at Poland. So Poland is now headed up since 2023 by a guy named Donald Tusk. He's gone after a vice minister in their Justice Department, a guy named Romanowski. You can see a picture of me in a second here. I spoke at an event for Mr. Romanowski. They've gone after him to the point where this former justice minister, they've tried to prosecute him. They've arrested him. This guy's now, the guy on the left of your picture, that guy has now sought political asylum in Hungary because they're using lawfare to go after people. Does that sound familiar?
Sounds very familiar. Trump, of course, was indicted 4 times, basically by his political opposition also. And I'll let you go on, but this brings me back to my book, because what I learned about the Soviet oppression in Hungary and Poland and other states, of course, is that was one of their tactics to destroy the will of their political opponents. Is they would bring lawfare against them. You've heard of Soviet show trials. That's what show trials do. They make the public think that someone who's not guilty really is. And it erodes the will of your opponent to keep fighting. So anyway.
And that's a standard tactic, as you pointed out.
Right.
It continues in France. What can you tell us about the situation in France with Marine Le Pen? Is there lawfare there as well?
I believe so, yeah. It's Marine Le Pen, and I was able to meet some of her staff members while I was there. Very interesting. But she had also some charges brought against her that seemed very trumped up charges.
No pun intended.
No pun intended, that were meant to keep her in jail and not to be able to run for president, because her party also is, and I can't think about how to say it in English, the name of her party. Do you remember? In French, it's National Rassemblement. But anyway, so her party also is growing in size and in prominence, just like the party in Germany, just like the Conservative Party in Austria.
Yeah, so talk about, back up on our map, Austria is another country that's, I can think of it as being in trouble, because what you've described to me with your friends and contacts in the Austrian government, it sounds like, again, more manipulation and gamesmanship, more efforts to circumvent election outcomes. What's happening in Austria?
The Freedom Party, the Conservative Party there, has really grown in prominence over the past, I guess, 2 or 3 years. I mean, they have just surged. And Herbert Kickl, the leader of the party, actually won the populist vote last November. But the other parties, and they have a different system than we do.
It's a parliamentary right.
system. The other parties got together and, in summary, kept them from being able to form a government. So they haven't been able to form a government.
So Freedom Party in Austria had a plurality, but they didn't have a majority. And so they would have to ally with the smaller parties to build up to have a majority.
Right, that's right.
And so they conspire against them just to deprive them.
Yeah.
I guess the Austrian president did something pretty extraordinary too. The Austrian president ignored the election outcome.
He ignored the election and gave the mandate to form the government to somebody else, not Kickl.
Right.
Now, eventually he came back around when they couldn't form it and gave it to Kickl, but that's like totally not traditional in Austrian government processes, and it's...
And there's a parallel in Germany, right, with
That's
Alternative for Deutschland, AfD,
Yes.
another party that has won pluralities, but not a majority.
Right.
And rather than being able to form alliances or coalition government,
the other coalitions have come to form, like, it's called a firewall, right?
Yeah.
Where they can't get past that to actually be in the ruling seat of government. So there's all kinds of things. Like with AfD, as we were saying, you know, the government that's in power right now was trying to take them down by spying on them, has tried to ban their party.
I'll lay some German on you.
Okay.
The Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz.
Exactly.
Which is the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. That's the German counterintelligence service, who I had dealings with many, many moons ago. They designated the AfD as an extremist group.
Right, right.
Which allowed them to open up, you know, all sorts of investigative activity and surveillance. And so you have the leading, it's not the majority, but it's the leading party in Germany.
Right.
And the opposition decides to basically call them outlaws and criminals.
So here's the crux of that matter, right? They're winning the populist vote, and the Freedom Party is winning the populist vote. What blows my mind is that the elites, you know, whoever happens to be in the ruling seat at that time, thinks that the people aren't smart enough to know who they want to rule their government.
Exactly.
Just like in America, we dealt with that with the Biden administration, you know, and if you believe that the election was stolen, which it seems to me that it probably was, but there was always the Biden administration or operatives on the left going against the will of the people, trying to keep Trump out of, you know, running for office again. It just blows my mind.
That's again Vice President Vance saying, you know, when you choose to ignore election outcomes, we can't protect you from your own people.
Exactly.
And that's the environment they're creating.
And that's what he brought up, that you are suppressing the voice of your own people. And we've got to get that understanding across to the political people, the elites who are doing these kind of things. I guess they don't care. This goes back to Marxism and communism. They want control. They don't care about the voice of the people.
It's all about power. Let's put our map back up again for a second. So we've got Romania taken care of. We talked about Poland, which is out of control. Again, they just had an election this past weekend, and surprise, surprise, through intimidation tactics. You know who showed up in Poland last week? Barack Obama. So
I
if
saw
Barack
that.
Obama's wandering around your country, you've got a problem. We talked about Germany and Austria. France, Marine Le Pen, they tried to criminalize her with lawfare, again, to knock her out of being able to run. She probably, if the election were today, she would win. But they want to eliminate her from even being able to run. We're going to still talk about the UK and Spain. The UK, this is something that J.D. Vance talked about. We'll talk about Spain last. But in the UK, if you're quietly sitting on or standing at a street corner and minding your own business, you can be arrested because you're committing a thought crime.
Right.
Do you want to explain what kind of thought crime you can?
Well, can I talk about what Vance brought up in the speech?
Sure.
Because it just chaps my hide, as my grandmother used to say. A man was actually standing outside, away from abortion clinic in the UK, silently in his head, praying. And when the authorities came over and demanded to know what he was doing, he told him, "I'm praying for a child that my girlfriend and I aborted several years ago." So this was on his heart and his conscience.
Right.
And he was actually arrested for praying, because they have these, I forget what,
Like a bubble zone.
A bubble
Yeah.
zone. You're not allowed to stand on the sidewalk like this. You can't, if you admit to praying,
Again,
and he's been fined. Also, he was arrested and fined. I mean, what the heck is going on?
literally a thought crime, right?
Yes.
1984 was supposed to be a warning, not an instruction manual. Unfortunately, in the UK, they've taken it as an instruction manual, and they're going after people for thinking inappropriate thoughts according to...
How do you police that, Chris? Do you remember that there was a member of European Parliament on one of the panels that
During your book tour.
during my book tour, told you this, that said that they had just come back from a training where they were told that harassment could, or discrimination, was it?
Yeah.
Could also come in the form if you ignored somebody. How in the heck do you police that, and why would you? I mean, freedom, people, freedom.
Yeah, the idea that just because you choose not to pay attention to
Right.
someone, that in and of itself is an offense.
So I decide you're ignoring me, so I'm going to report you to the authorities.
And who knows what happens to you for ignoring. And last but not least, in our lineup of European countries that are in trouble, in Spain, the Vox party, which is a sort of a make Spain great again type, it's a populist nationalist party on the right.
Not in power, the leftists
Not
are.
in power,
Right.
but a leading opposition party. Although no one has ever been charged with this before, and no one has ever had a judgment brought against them before, suddenly a Spanish court has decided to fine them 860,000 euros, which, I mean, round figures, that's about $1 million, not exactly, but close. So a small populist party, or growing, but not the majority populist party, gets $1 million fine. In my view, that's more lawfare, right? This is another
absolutely.
attempt to knock the legs out from under a political operation. It reminds me a little bit of the techniques used against the Tea Party movement in the United States,
Yeah.
where these organizations were trying to get off the ground, create 501c3 nonprofits, try to organize, try to raise money, try to run some operations, some activities, and surprise, surprise, suddenly the IRS was scrutinizing everything they did.
Right.
And it was an attempt to intimidate and to control and to suppress political activity.
Right.
And in my view, in Spain, that's the story with Vox. You
agree.
made a presentation in Madrid, Spain, as part of your book tour.
Yeah.
What are some of your impressions from your visit with the people in Madrid?
You know, Madrid was a little bit different in that they weren't really aware. The other countries that I went to and the people that came to them were very much aware that this progressivism is very much like the Marxism of the old Soviet era. But in Madrid, they were willing to listen and try to learn when I gave examples of what the Biden administration, what the EU is doing, like we're talking about right now. They were willing to think, oh, you're right. And I had so many people come up and ask for a book and say, I really enjoyed what you said. I hadn't thought about it. I was confused about what was going on. And so anyway, it was an eye-opener for me to learn from people their impressions of what was going on as well in the EU.
Of course, their history is a little different, right? So they're not like an Eastern European country that had experienced the Germans, then experienced the Soviets, then gotten their freedom. Spain has a very different history, right? They have the legacy of Franco and how they kind of maneuvered their way out to being a kingdom, but with a parliamentary process. So it's interesting that they had a different view, a different kind of take on it, because their experiences were different. And as you've mentioned repeatedly, I mean, it's a blessing, but it's also kind of a problem for Americans that Americans have never known what it's like to be occupied or to have all of their freedoms stripped, like so many in these other countries that you went to and visited.
Right.
And I think, that's sort of an inspiration for your book.
That's why I wrote the book the way I did. I went to do a research book on Hungary, basically, I thought, for Hungarians. And then when I was hearing all of this and people were actually, had tears in their eyes asking me if there was hope for America, this was still under the Biden administration, because Hungary and other countries in Eastern Europe had looked to America as the light on the shining light on the hill, the beacon. And that hope that they had seen when they were under Soviet rule, we wish we could be like that. They have a statue of Reagan in Hungary. They love Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and they wanted these things. And now these people who had experienced that are looking at the Biden administration and seeing the same tactics the Soviet Union had done to them, and it was crushing them. So I realized I had to write this book for Americans, for Western civilizations, like that map that you put up there, to try to spread this message, because quite honestly, Marxism and communism, it's not taught in schools like this. I didn't learn it like this.
I want to go to one clip that you made talking about the urgency of what we've discussed here. I have several more questions for you, but I think this is a good place to hear what you were saying in some of your book interviews. If we could play Dr. Shea's.
America and Western civilization here in Europe, we are one step away from losing our civilization to Marxism. I wrote this book because Hungary is a great example of coming through communism and still maintaining their national identity. They came through communism and now they're fighting the EU wokeism, which is very similar to the Marxism that they endured for 46 years until 1991.
There you go.
Right.
That's exactly what you were saying.
And where I really kind of had a spark when I was writing the book, or before I'd written the book, was Prime Minister Orban of Hungary had said in one of his speeches that the critical race theory, for example, the gender ideology, these things were structured very much like the scientific socialism that he had to learn in college under Soviet rule.
Right.
Here is an organized process for society. This is how everyone has to act. You don't have the freedom to think what you want to think or do what you want to do. During the Soviet era, people who were academics, who were professional people, were also cleaning
toilets. So you could commit a thought crime. You're a professor, and you are a professor, but if you said something in a class or taught something or you wrote a paper that was not acceptable, you would be stripped of your position at an institute or at a university,
right,
and you would be reassigned to go clean toilets at that university.
But and what has happened here in America in the last 10 years? Lots of academics who have spoken.
Or take your COVID shot, or guess what happens to you?
You lose your job. Academics lose their job. They don't agree with the transgender ideology nonsense. They lose their jobs. They're canceled. This is exactly the Soviet tactics, that Eastern Europe went through.
So this is a strong message that
Central Europe.
This is a strong message that not every contemporary European thinks about.
Right, and that's why that's a large reason why I wrote the book the way I did it. I mean, even I was learning. I didn't understand the direct correlations between what was going on now under so-called progressivism and what had happened under Marxism. And I always bring this up, so I have to do it. There are, I think, 11 points of communist psychological warfare that our Department of Defense in the United States put out as like a lesson around 1960 on how to fight communist psychological warfare. I put them in the book, and I gave examples of how every one of them applies to what was going on under the Biden administration, in particular in the US, and the things that have gone on in the EU as well. So that's why I say we have one more shot, really. I think that the American people rose up and saw through a lot of this because a lot of people started teaching about it. Then President Trump, they oppressed him so hard and then tried to kill him.
Right.
And so Americans, thank God, we are Americans, rose up and said, forget this. And I want to cuss, but I won't do that on the show. But forget this. We want real leadership. We want a real America back.
You got a very strong message, both in person and in the book. And then, of course, you had sort of a Vice President Vance's comments in Munich also kind of shook up the Europeans. Yeah. Then you come on the scene, and you have a strong message. But let's flip it around for a second. What did you learn from your European audiences, whether it's Warsaw, Vienna, Brussels? What sort of feedback or insights? You've got a strong message, you're putting it out there, but also I think people come to you and they say stuff. What are some of the key things that you came back with and thought about and said, well, maybe I didn't think about that, or that was a new idea?
Well, I learned a lot of factual knowledge from them about this and that, but I think the biggest thing that stands out for me when you ask me that is the encouragement they felt of having someone stand there and say, this is the nonsense that's going on, it's wrong, and let's stop covering it up. This one stands out in my mind, a university guy who was working towards his Ph.D. He said, you have made me feel more brave, courage. I have courage to write my Ph.D. about this. And that, I was like, wow, I was signing a book for him, really. Sure. Because, you go around and you do your work, and sometimes you wonder if anybody's listening to you or if it's making a difference. And that meant the world to me. But in each city, I had a lot of people come up to me and say, thank you for saying what you did. We need that message. And quite often, people said to me, you've given me courage to continue to speak against what I know to be wrong. So
I find what we've been talking about very interesting. Obviously, Vice President Vance thinks it's important. President Trump thinks it's important. That's why we put those video clips in, to give context or to lay a foundation. But at this point in our conversation, I just want to go back and kind of ping the audience, whether they're watching or listening to this. And I want you to tell them, why is it important? Why should, a MAGA, pro-Trump, America First American who's busy going to work, paying the mortgage, dropping the kids off at school, going to practice, all the kind of busy stuff of life, why should they give a damn about Europe or about what Europeans think or about European politics or culture? Bring it home to them. Make it real for an American. Why does all this discussion about Europe matter?
because in a simple sentence, what happens over there eventually comes here. I have had, for a decade experience of that, going to the United Nations, and in Europe, all this transgender ideology is coming through the United Nations and I kept telling people about 8 years ago, maybe, I don't remember exactly, and our people, our Congress, Republicans, hey guys, this transgender stuff, it's going to hit us really hard. This is coming. Everybody on our playing field, on our side, was worried about abortion, which rightfully so, but I was trying to explain that it was going to come and transform our schools and transform the ideology taught to our children and transform their bodies. It was very strong, and guess what happened in the last...
It showed up here.
It showed up here in a very horrible, strong way. So that's just an example to try to make people understand. We're now especially a very globalized world. In fact, I believe that's eventually how the Marxist thought and ideology has made its way to the United States. The Communist International, its goal was to spread communism throughout the world. And
it did.
It got to take over Eastern Europe, and it continued spreading. And if you talk about the Frankfurt School coming over and establishing itself in New York City, and some of those academics there are being advisors to Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Exactly.
So it doesn't stay over there. Just because there's an ocean, it's not going to stay there.
So I guess one of the things I think about is, people make reference to Western civilization. And when they say that, that's a buzz term or a code word or whatever you want to call it. It's a general broad category that basically takes you from Athenian democracy, 400 BC, all the way up to today, right? Mm-hmm. It's our tradition. It's the shared experience of a Christian Europe, Christendom, right? And then later we kind of expanded that and used the term Judeo-Christian ethic. That's the umbrella kind of experience that's shared between Europe and the United States.
Right.
The foundation of our founding documents, all those big picture notions.
Right.
I get the sense that in Europe it's a little hollow. You know what I mean? Like it's not a hard, solid thing anymore. It's a little brittle, mm-hmm. a little wobbly. It may not necessarily be what we thought it was. And then a Reagan expression, we could be the last best hope on earth. That all those principles and ideas, they're here in the United States, and we may be the last holdout for all these things. That's something that I think about when it comes to why we should care about these Europeans who we're in an alliance with militarily.
Well, absolutely. That's true as well. I think like I said, we almost didn't make it.
Right.
If Kamala Harris was our new president, you could probably kiss most of that goodbye. Freedom and democracy is part of our shared value. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of belief is part of our shared values, and we almost lost it here. But that was the other thing with the Europeans that I talked to. They believe that we are that shining light again on the hill, and there's much potential to be excited about. And I really believe that if the Europeans, the conservatives there, like I said, the parties there of conservatism are really gaining in strength all over Europe. If we come together, this is an opportunity for us to defeat the globalist agenda, all this that we've talked about today. I think that President Trump is going to recreate the economic system globally, and I think that it will have a lot to do with also recreating the political system within the EU. This is an opportunity right now for us to fight it.
It sounds like you gave a lot of these European colleagues and these different book talks and panel discussions, it sounds to me like you gave them a lot of encouragement. That maybe they weren't sure, or maybe they were a little afraid,
sure.
Or maybe they looked at situations in the countries that we went point by point on.
Sure.
And they might have been a little wobbly, and that your book, your presentation, the panel discussions, that people were kind of plussed up. They got a little support and encouragement from that. Is that a fair?
I think so, and I got it back from them as well. I mean, Suzanne First of the Freedom Party, she was on one of my panels and hosted an event through their foundation. Barbara Colm, these are women who are very strong parliamentarians in Austria.
Yeah.
Excuse me, in Austria, in Vienna. And they are right on the issues. They are strong. They speak out. And I was like, yeah, that's encouraging to me. I needed that.
You touched on this briefly, but I want to kind of go back and hit it one more time. There appears to be a lot of drama and hand-wringing about President Trump and tariffs. I mean, it's just a negotiating tactic, right? Do the Europeans get that?
Most of them do, yeah. They understand, first of all, we need a more level playing field, that it doesn't make sense if somebody's got 50% tariffs on us. It just doesn't make sense. But I did explain that in that way, is that Trump is using tariffs as negotiation tools of diplomacy. I mean, if you look in the very beginning of his second administration, he was using tariffs on Mexico and Canada to get them to stop the flow of fentanyl into our borders. That's killing our people in record numbers. He used them as a leveraging tool against Colombia and Venezuela to get them to take back their violent criminals who were here illegally. So yeah, and I think it's a very smart way to go about it. Again, I encouraged people that I spoke with to come to the negotiation table quickly. I don't see a lot of movement from the EU on that. I know the UK has done that. Even India and China has arrived to start talks. So what I'm saying is it's working. I mean, India is a major manufacturing hub, and I think that it's already having a lot of influence, and we have to do it.
So in these book talks that you gave and the events around them, like I said, 5 different capitals. So it was Budapest, Brussels, Vienna, Warsaw, Madrid. That's quite a lineup. You're talking about your book, but you're talking, I guess a lot of people are really interested in Trump's first 100 days, right? I mean, it's kind of a dual topic issue for all of them. Who helped put this all together and make this happen for you?
2 great organizations were at the base of it. That's the Center for Fundamental Rights in Budapest, Hungary, and also the Patriots for Europe Foundation, which I think is actually headquartered in Paris, but they have an office in Brussels as well. But they were the leaders of it, and then there were other institutes in the different states or nation states that helped out. Center for Fundamental Rights has a Madrid arm, for example.
And then Warsaw, Poland, Ordo Juris.
Yes.
And then Vienna, it was the Freedom Party's.
It was their institute, and I can't say the name, so don't ask me to.
That's all right. That's right. No German language training. And for those folks watching and listening, Dr. Shea's book has been endorsed by Tucker Carlson, the late, great Lou Dobbs, a dear friend of mine and of this show and Judicial Watch, Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, a real American hero who's put it all on the line, and last but not least, Congressman Paul Gosar from Arizona. So those are pretty tremendous book endorsements. And you have your colleagues at the Center for Fundamental Rights and Patriots for Europe. Patriots for Europe, my understanding is it's really sort of a European Parliament party or association.
Or a coalition of the conservative parties. Thank you for bringing that up. So like the Freedom Party in Austria and the AfD from Germany, for example, the Volksparty from Spain, they're part of this coalition in the European Parliament.
And it calls itself Patriots for Europe.
For Europe.
Yeah. It's sort of like a Make Europe Great Again kind of populist, nationalist,
that's exactly right.
Conservative movement. Dr. Shea, thank you for taking time to come in and talk to us. I think it's very important. for people to understand that our friends in Europe, and they are our friends, there are NATO allies,
Yeah.
but there's some real problems. There's some real issues there. Vice President Vance talked about it in the 2 clips we played. We've gone through kind of a list of various situations in different countries. And we point out all those problems, but I think your message is one of hope.
Absolutely.
That it's not a doomsday scenario.
All of us are coming together right now, and we have Trump in leadership. That's why I'm saying this is such an opportunity. And I was telling people also, you know, President Trump wants to avoid economic fragmentation as far as the tariffs go, because Russia, China, North Korea will try to take advantage of that. So it's a political opportunity and economic opportunity for us to come together. And that's what I got from my book tour, is that there are, and hundreds that came to the presentations, I guess with the conference also thousands, but thousands on social media. And also, there are a lot of people out there fighting for freedom and democracy. And actually, next week, you too, we're both speaking at CPAC Hungary to also come together with thousands of conservatives from all over Europe and the United States, South America. So it is a message of hope. We just got to keep doing the right thing.
Dr. Shea, thank you for taking time to join us on Watch. Very interesting conversation. And I think an important one. Doesn't really get enough attention. You know, foreign policy can sometimes be a tough sell to a domestic American audience.
Right.
But it's a huge part of security and trade and all the things that President Trump advocated for in that clip from Saudi Arabia.
It goes back to maintaining our own national security. Absolutely.
Dr. Shea, thank you for joining us on Watch.
Thank
we
you,
appreciate
sir.
it very much. I'm Chris Farrell on Watch.